under some pressure in relation to choosing which slides to present to you. So I'm going to start with a question which I have had in my mind all the many years I've been involved in this disease, which is, why is it so important? Why is there so much attention on hemophilia? One of the first reasons is that hemophilia is a kind of romantic disease. You all know that hemophilia has affected important people, and in fact it has affected the royal families of Europe. And you can see here where this started with Her Majesty Queen Victoria, who was the great-grandmother, I think I've got that right, of the current Queen of England. And Queen Victoria, like most people in the 19th century, had a lot of children. She was obliged, in any case, to have a lot of children in order to make sure there were enough kings and queens, not just for the United Kingdom, but also for Europe. And it just so happened that pretty soon after she started to produce her large family, some interesting problems started to occur with one of her sons. And he is shown over here. This is Prince Leopold. Like all the members of the royal family, he was given a title. So given that he was not the first son, he was called the Duke of Albany. And this man, as a child, started to show certain signs which today we know very well. And when he was 31 years old, he fell down, bumped his head, and died of what we know was a brain hemorrhage. He had hemophilia. Subsequently, other members of the royal families which came as a result of the fecundity of Queen Victoria showed these signs, and this, as you know, is the most famous hemophiliac in history. This is the young Tsarevich Alexis. He was the great-grandson of Queen Victoria. His mother was unquestionably a carrier. She was the granddaughter of Victoria. And he had a very miserable life. He had a pain-filled life. He was close to death many times. If you see certain photographs of Alexis dressed in military uniform, you will see that Alexis is always like this. And this is very familiar to us. Alexis had chronic arthropathy in the knee. He had also bleeds in the hips. And the importance of hemophilia is accentuated by the Tsarevich because it was one of the ways in which the famous monk Rasputin gained influence in the royal family of Russia, and eventually this led to the historical events that you know. A brief aside, who can tell me in this room which kind of hemophilia is the royal hemophilia? Is it A or B? It's B. We only found this out in 2009 when the bones of the Tsarevich, along with those of his relatives who were killed at the same time, were excavated and analyzed by DNA. It was found that, somewhat to people's surprise, because the natural assumption is that 80% of hemophilia is A, they would have been A. Actually, Queen Victoria's original defective gene was a hemophilia B gene. Nowadays, we are reasonably confident that this romantic side of hemophilia is extinct, because most of the descendants of Victoria who could have been transmitting are no longer around. But there is a small possibility that some of the descendants of the former royal family of Spain, not the current incumbents, but the previous ones which were around before the Civil War, may still be carriers. A little history. So, hemophilia is important. It is because it is romantic. Why else is hemophilia important? Well, as has been, and some of the things I will try not to repeat, but some of the things I say will have been obviously said by Stan Nicoletti and Professor Manucci. The other reason why hemophilia is important is again a bad reason, and that is because the community was, if you like, in the front line of all the diseases which are spread through infection by blood, and it was in fact, as was mentioned by Professor Manucci, devastated in the 70s to 1990s by these viral infections, First AIDS and then the hepatitis viruses, which were always there, but people didn't realize they could be dangerous as well. And this led to a huge catastrophe in our community. And Manucci and I, for many years, we would go to the World Federation of Haemophilia congresses in the 1980s, and we would say, where is so-and-so? So-and-so is dead. 2 years later, we go to another congress, where is so-and-so? So-and-so is dead. This was a terrible time for the community, but it did lead to a higher level of visibility for our illness, which is not a bad thing. That's the second reason. Now, since I have to shorten a lot my talk, I'm going to focus now on the main aspect which I was asked to talk about, which is our involvement in international issues. And this leads me to the third reason. I'm going to talk about patient organizations like yours. I think much of what I say should be familiar to you. But as with many chronic rare diseases, people with hemophilia know more about the disease, certainly than all general practicing doctors. And I would like to think that eventually people with hemophilia know more about the disease than anybody else, because we have to live with it, and it's a very rare disease. And because of the nature of the disease, it kind of imposes a lifestyle, if you like, which makes you want to learn and study and know more about your condition. And this leads to organization. It leads to the associations which we know about. And these associations are gathered internationally under the umbrella of the World Federation of Haemophilia. It says something about this. And there is a strong engagement with industry. And this leads me to the third reason why hemophilia is so very important. Ragazzi, hemophilia makes many people rich. Hemophilia is worth $9 billion each year in terms of the market. And remember, and I will mention, as Manucci said, the vast proportion, the vast amount of our community around the world is untreated. This $9 billion is raised primarily in the United States and in Western Europe. So this is economically a very important illness. That's the next reason, therefore, why is hemophilia so important. So let's say something about the World Federation of Haemophilia. The World Federation of Haemophilia was created in the early 1960s. And it's a very curious geographical location for the World Federation of Haemophilia because it is based on the city of Montreal. And this is because its founder was a man called Frank Schnabel. I remember him well. I think Professor Manucci remembers him even more. And he was a Canadian. He lived in the city of Montreal, and he started this federation. And you can see here on this slide, the countries which are shown in red are the current countries, the regions of the world which are covered by the World Federation of Haemophilia. Those countries in blue are the 12 countries which were represented in the very first meeting in 1963. Happily, Australia, which is where I am from, was one of them. And here is another very interesting photograph, and I think you can really recognize this handsome young man over here because he is still with us, and this, of course, is Professor Manucci. It is from 1979. This is my very good friend, Professor Ricardo from Sydney, Australia. This is Professor Israngakoon from Thailand, from Bangkok. I don't know, Piero, whether you know who these other people are. Maybe you would like to remember. Who are these other guys? Yeah.
The one on the right, my right is Walter Bowie. The one next to him is a dentist that was involved in the USA 2018. The one on the left, quite frankly, I don't know, the one on the still left. He must be an orthopedic surgeon.
Va bene. Anyway, Professor Bowie was one of the most famous investigators in the basic coagulation mechanism and, of course, in the role of factor VIII. Very good. So we have had this association for many years now, and it is extremely important and produces much good. And this is a photograph which is showing much more recent leaders, and this is the former President Mark Skinner, and this is Azad Hafar, who is in charge of programs in the Middle East and countries, and this is an example of the signing of a so-called GAP agreement. GAP is, it's obviously a word, GAP means there is something missing, and it's also an acronym, the Global Alliance for Progress. And in this program, which is one of the most worthy of the WFH programs, the association enters into an agreement with a government, in this instance it is the government of Tunisia, to support the provision of treatment factors in the relevant country. And what happens is that the WFH, through its contacts with industry, provides a certain amount of coagulation factor concentrate, and the country involved as a partner in the GAP commits to providing an equal amount. This has been one of the primary ways in which the treatment of hemophilia has been initiated in the countries which are not as fortunate as ours. The philosophy that we have in this community internationally is that we need the patients to survive. We need the babies to survive, to grow up, to be like you, so that they can then agitate and advocate for treatment. But they're not going to survive if there is no factor at all. So we provide the means whereby the community can actually start. The rest is up to the countries involved, but as has happened in our societies, by increasing awareness and increasing pressure, we hope and expect that these countries will show support and compassion for hemophilia, and in this way we can continue to grow the good things for the community. But the World Federation of Hemophilia is important in many, many ways, and one of the most important aspects is to gather information. And every 2 years we conduct what is called the Global Survey. This is available, like practically all the material of the Federation, on their website. And this is a very important work, you should be aware of it, whereby the national member organizations gather information which is on the ground in terms of their respective situations in their countries, and send it to the World Federation to be compiled in one large database. So what is the information? Well, the information consists of the things which are important for the maintenance and the treatment of hemophilia. Diagnosis, how many patients, what facilities are there for diagnosis, how much treatment is used. And all of this is related to the general situation in the country. And I like to show a lot the kind of information which you can see on this slide, whereby we relate the economic situation of a country to the overall provision of clotting factor concentrate. And in this instance, we focus, as is usually the case, on factor VIII, and this is the amount of factor VIII per capita. And you can see very much what is obvious in all aspects of human life, which is that economic inequality is also very visible in hemophilia, and that countries which have a low income in terms of their overall GDP are providing very little care, whereas countries which have a much higher income are providing much more care. This is something which we all know about, the overall economic inequality in the world, and it cannot be otherwise for hemophilia, because hemophilia is a rare disease and it is very expensive. And countries which do not have clean drinking water and the capacity to vaccinate their children and the ability to make sure that mothers can give birth without having the kind of problems which we had 100 and 150 years ago and surviving and so on, these are higher priorities. We cannot expect that hemophilia will be any better, but this is the kind of information which is important. But of course, it's a question of priorities, and if you look, and I will mention some of these countries in more detail, if you look, for example, at the budgets spent on weapons by certain countries, you can see that they actually spend quite a lot on armaments. Look at Pakistan, India. I'll come to India again in a second. Look at China, which still is in a very bad situation with hemophilia. Pakistan is interesting. Many years ago, I went for my one and only ever visit to Pakistan, to Karachi, with our friend Dr. Bruce Evett from America. We were on a mission to examine the situation and improve the situation for hemophilia. This was about 17, 18 years ago. We were met by a gentleman in the Ministry of Health. He was in the Ministry of Health, but he was dressed in a full army uniform. And he said, well, thank you for coming to Karachi, and we are welcoming you because you made this big journey. But this is not a problem in our country because this is a Western infection. And we said, well, look, this is not an infection, first of all. This is a congenital disease. But of course, they didn't think it was a problem in their country because there was hardly any treatment, and all the boys died. And let me just mention that circumcision is a very good way of eliminating hemophilia unless you have provisions ready to take care of it. It is an interesting point which many people don't recognize, that it's not just a question of economic factor, there are cultural, religious problems as well. It is interesting that the first description of hemophilia in the literature of mankind occurs in the Talmud. And circumcision in the Jewish faith is exempt if you have hemophilia in the family. This is something which we would like to see replicated in other faiths. But I have mentioned this because it's a question of priorities, and not just for hemophilia, but for aspects of public health. So let us now focus on one country, just say something about India, which is a very important country, and you can see here that India, we have a large number of patients diagnosed. I'll come to diagnosis in a second. This is by no means all the hemophilia in India. It's just what has managed to be diagnosed. But you can see that the per capita consumption is immensely low compared to these other countries. So what's the problem? Well, first of all, this is the result. These are not pictures which we can take in Italy anymore, fortunately. They were pictures perhaps which we could take in Italy 40 or 50 years ago. They're not pictures which we can take nowadays. All these bad things which I have mentioned, ragazzi, you were not even born when we had to experience all these bad things, including viral infection, crippling, and so on. You are very fortunate. These are people like you in countries which are nowhere as fortunate. Recently taken photographs in the Indian subcontinent. So the first problem, if you look at India, is diagnosis. The observed prevalence and the estimated prevalence, assuming that hemophilia prevalence, which we think is the case, is reasonably uniform throughout the world, are very different. So probably at the moment we have diagnosed less than 20%, maybe 20% of the hemophilia population in the whole country. That's the first problem. The second problem is getting the products, getting the therapeutic concentrates. Given that the country is very reluctant to invest in getting products from outside, and in fact, earlier this year, as I shall show you, the Haemophilia Foundation of India had to do a strong campaign to prevent this. There's the question of, therefore, can we generate product within India? I personally think that India can never collect all the blood needed to make enough factor VIII for its hemophilia population. Neither India nor China. And in all probability, we can discuss this if you like, Piero, in all probability for the growing emergence of hemophilia in these countries, we really do need recombinant concentrates structured in an appropriate way. But you can see that basically the problem is that the blood collection in India is extremely small, and there is no way we can generate enough factor VIII for the hemophilia population. But even if we did, there's the question of safety. The bad things which I told you about earlier on, about hepatitis and AIDS and so on, are abolished in our societies. We do not have this problem anymore. Nowadays, hemophilia concentrates made from plasma here in Italy and in all the Western world are probably safer than anti-cholesterol drugs or headache pills. But this is not the case in India. And you can see here, this is the transfusion-transmitted disease incidence in Indian hemophiliacs, and you can see that many of them are still getting infections from the kinds of products which they are given: blood transfusion, untreated plasma, and cryoprecipitate. This is happening now. So we have all these problems. And however, the community is strong and getting stronger and using all the means which it can in order to generate communication and solidarity. And at the moment, I'm kind of interested in the use of social media in hemophilia. And it's quite interesting. If you go to India, you will find that the phones, normal desk telephones, don't work. Mind you, this is most frequently the case also in Italy. But if you look at mobile phone networks, they're very efficient. They're like everywhere else in the world, and most Indians have a cell phone. So they use all the apps, they use WhatsApp, they use Facebook, they use anything which can be used to generate information and the communication. In the whole set of slides which is available to you, there are examples from Twitter, and these are some examples from the Haemophilia Foundation in India. And you can see here that this is, for example, a patient who is contesting an election to be elected as one of the official, and this is a similar post on WhatsApp. And earlier this year, the Indian government attempted to restrict the importation of hemophilia concentrates into the continent. So not only was there a very low amount being imported because of economic reasons, but also what was being imported, they tried to restrict it because there was a lobbying attempt by the local manufacturer of these products to disallow the importation of foreign products. It was the patients which primarily stopped this for hemophilia drugs. It happened for other drugs, but for hemophilia drugs it was proposed but was withdrawn. So community and solidarity are extremely important. Now, I think that Professor Manucci has already spoken a lot about technologies. I was going to speak some more, but given that you are busy, I will skip some slides, but I will show you some of the technologies which we have, which are more or less promising. He spoke to you about longer-acting products. This is a slide, and I apologize because it is quite technical, but it basically shows what are called the extended half-life products, which are coming from the factor VIII area. We have several of these products. One very good thing in this phase of my career is we have many products, whether they're recombinant or plasma, whether they're extended half-life or not extended half-life, human or non-human cell lines. The good thing that we have is we have many products. Why is this good? Because it increases therapeutic choice. And because it allows, something which I did want to talk about, but we don't have time, it allows much more personalized therapy. It allows us now, in this era where we have so many different products with different properties, to say, well, here's this patient, he has a half-life himself of factor VIII of so many hours, we can match him to this product which we know is best for him. So we have many products, and this is a good thing. It's another good thing is it engenders competition between the manufacturers. They want the $9 billion. So there is a lot of products. The more products there are, the more competition there is for the $9 billion, the more the price can drop. I can tell you, in real economic terms, it's an expensive disease. It's less expensive than it was 10 years ago, unquestionably. Prices keep dropping. Va bene. Okay, so this is the factor VIII we have at the moment. Professor Manucci expressed his doubts, which I share, about factor VIII, because we know that the factor VIII, in fact, does not exist. It is it's something, una fantasia. What exists in the body is factor VIII with Big Brother von Willebrand factor, and therefore the kinetics, the circulatory half-life of factor VIII depends on von Willebrand factor, and therefore, although we do get some extension in half-life in these longer-acting half-life factor VIII, it is not very big. The situation is very nicely different for factor IX, and this is a slide which I like to show, Piero, because this is showing the interesting phenomenon of technological redundancy through competition. What do I mean? On the extreme left, as you look at it, is the first long-acting factor IX product. This is the product from Biogen Idec. Although this product has only been available for about a year and a half, it's already looking old-fashioned. It's already looking redundant. Why? Because pretty soon after it, CSL launched their own recombinant factor IX with a longer half-life, and you can see the size of the Frecciarossa is the extent to which the half-life is extended, okay? So the bigger the Frecciarossa, the bigger the half-life. Fedemo. So you can see that the CSL product, the recombinant factor IX FP, is bigger than the Biogen Idec product. But now look what happens with this new product from Novo Nordisk, which has a different technology. The half-life is bigger again. So each product, it's amazing, the technology is faster than the market, in all honesty, because each product is better than the previous one in terms of half-life. And you know, this has implications for the question of gene therapy, because I personally, if I had to choose between getting the Novo product, which can keep me at about 30% for a fortnight with my particular kinetics with one infusion, and the gene therapy, which so far can only give you at best 5 to 6%. One injection per fortnight is not much to suffer in order to attain what is basically a normal life. So you can see that we have good progress in hemophilia B.
Sorry. The time between the first and the last therapy, how
Yes.
much is?
You mean the Frecciarossa?
The time between the first therapy and the last, how much is?
The interval between
Yeah,
injections?
yes.
Okay, depends on which product, but for example with this one here, and it depends on the patient, how much the patient themselves have, but with this one, the half-life is 93 hours, so it depends on the patient, but if you look at patients who are severe, with a once weekly injection given sufficient dose, that will keep the trough level quite adequately above what is needed for normal protection from bleeding. And then, of course, you can increase a bit the frequency depending on the patient, and you will have an even better situation, because you will then be protected if you want to go and play soccer or do something like that. I think it's important to accentuate the concept of personalized therapy, because when you ask how much is the frequency of the injection, you need to look at the individual patient. We cannot afford anymore to think in terms of just straightforward guidelines. And this, in fact, I want to give as an example, this situation over here. Now, this is from a paper which looks at, in the context of another scientific question, the time of day at which bleeding occurs. So obviously, between midnight and 8 o'clock in the morning when you're asleep, there's not much stimulus, there's not much reason to have bleeding, so bleeds are very rare, and then, of course, the bleeds increase over the course of the time of day. Now, this is of some interest if we think about prophylaxis and we think about the infusion frequency, because if you look at, let's say, a normal infusion, a normal product, and this is showing us the increase, okay, after infusion, it's kind of like those graphs you saw before, and then the decrease. So then when you drop below this level, which we call the trough, okay, I was going to show you some more on this, but we don't have time, you have to then increase you have to again infuse in order to avoid being in this so-called danger zone. But if we have an infusion frequency like this, we can then calculate the danger zone as falling during the night and avoid trauma. So this can help us in relation to avoiding bleeds and having a good situation in terms of protecting the joints. If you look at the longer acting products, the situation has to be studied much more carefully, because if we do have an extended half-life, as you can see over here, so that we infuse on Monday and then we wait for a week, with this particular product we are going to drop into the danger zone in the middle of the week. So actually, marketing claims which say you can infuse once a week need to be taken with some doubt and need to be monitored, and the whole thing needs to be overseen by your treater to examine exactly how the individual patient characteristics can be fitted into the product. The point I seek to make is always that we need to have personalized therapy. Because individuals vary themselves. There is too much focus by the companies in terms of marketing on the product. The product is important, but more important is the patient. Patients themselves in terms like some people are tall, some people are short, some people have big noses, some people have big ears, some people have a longer half-life than others, and therefore it's important to tailor the half-life always, because this does have an effect. If you look at, for example, here is a whole bunch of data, okay, and this is basically showing different populations in terms of what's called the hemophilic severity score, which is just an aggregate way in terms of all the things which make up the clinical phenotype, the clinical picture, an aggregate way of describing your overall situation in terms of joints and so on. This shows us that even when we look at a population defined by the conventional criteria of whether they're severe, moderate or mild, A or B, you can see there is a huge variation. In other words, people who have similar levels of factor VIII, severe, 0 to 1%, actually they bleed in different ways. This is extremely important because it means that by personalizing and studying the patients, we can tailor the treatment infinitely better than we could before when we didn't have all these products. This is the importance of having the diversity of products, and this is why the benefit of the science and the advances of medicine can only be accessed if authorities can make the products available. And this is something which we don't have time to talk about today, maybe some other day. All right, Professor Marucci talked to you about the new therapies which are not based on replacement therapy. There are many of these. It is amazing how beautiful the research is and the science is, and very encouraging to see all this expensive work involving provi clinici in generating these treatments. This is the one which is pure meno, the most advanced. This is an interesting product because it is not a coagulation factor. This is an antibody. This is what's called a monoclonal antibody. It means that instead of being generated in a person or an animal, this is generated in cell lines which are specially manipulated to produce a lot of immunoglobulin. And this immunoglobulin, thanks to some really neat, brilliant molecular biology, generates what's called a bispecific monoclonal antibody. Now, this is the picture which shows you how this works. But this is essentially what was referred to by Professor Marucci. This is a bypassing agent. This basically makes factor VIII out of the job, pushes factor VIII aside and manages the job of factor VIII, which is to bring together factor IXA and factor X in a geographical proximity next to each other. It does this without the presence of factor VIII. So this is pure meno, if you like, a bit like factor VIIa, bypassing agents like fiber, and so on. And the original idea of the people who developed this in Japan, and now the product is being developed commercially by Roche, one of the biggest pharmas in the world, is that this would be a treatment for inhibitor. But actually, if you think about it, and these people are thinking about it, this could also be a treatment for people with normal Haemophilia A, because it makes factor VIII redundant. Of course, if you use this for inhibitor, this is not a tolerization therapy. You will still have the inhibitor. And there are, in my opinion, many questions to be asked about this, because so far the data indicates that, okay, this can be used and it can overcome certain situations, but if there is a patient with hemophilia who, for example, needs surgery, the inhibitor will still be there and this will not be adequate treatment. So we still have many questions, but we are excited about these therapies. And this is just from the relevant publication in the New England Journal of Medicine, which is the most important medical journal in the world. Incidentally, this paper on the new monoclonal antibody was published in the same edition of the New England Journal of Medicine, where the CPET study by Manucci and Peyvandi and all these people were published. So I think that this edition of the New England Journal of Medicine for our field will be one of the legendary editions, because it had these two very important papers. And what this shows, and I won't go into the detail, but it's not difficult to understand if you go to the journal, is that it works. It works in normal prophylaxis, it works as a bypassing agent, but it's not as good as standard treatment. You still get higher levels of annualized bleeding, what we call the ABR, the number of bleeds which you get each year, higher than in standard treatment. So there is still work to be done here. Now, a couple of words about gene therapy. Professor Mucci has already mentioned it. These are the gene therapy trials of hemophilia B. And as he has said himself, at least one trial has been successful, and we have had publications in the New England Journal of Medicine, which have demonstrated this success. As I said before, success in, come si dice in italiano, inverted commas? Va bene. Success in inverted commas. Because, okay, the patients went from 0% to about 5-6%. And the good Lord made people with 100% factor 9 for a good reason. 5% is better than 0%. 10% is better than 5%, believe me. And so on and so forth. However, we do have these treatments. And as I said, now this treatment is competing with the longer acting, because the longer acting factor 9s give us very good results. So far, if you want to accept the inconvenience of having an injection every 10 to 15 days, most patients can get better cover with these injections, with the longer acting, than they can with the gene therapy. So far. All right. Manucci has also mentioned the hemophilia A, the limitations with hemophilia A. Certainly, the success has not been as great. We have had many good results with animals, but with mice, if mice were people, there would be no cancer, because practically every cancer is able to be cured in mice, but not in people. However, at the World Federation of Haemophilia meeting in Orlando a couple of months ago, I was very surprised to go to a presentation on gene therapy in hemophilia A, and I went to this session because I didn't have anything better to do. I don't know if you've ever been to Orlando. If you've never been to Orlando, stay that way. Don't go. It's one of the most terrible places in the world. There is absolutely nothing there except for mentally retarded Americans. There are many mentally anyway. Okay, but the important thing is that out of the blue and without too much scientific detail, this company BioMare announced through a very respected hemophilia treater and investigator, John Pazzi in London, announced these preliminary results on their gene therapy for hemophilia A, which astonished us. Because in these patients, quite a few of them, got very good results, very high levels of factor 8, compared, for example, to the factor 9 gene therapy trials, levels above 50%. In fact, in some of these patients, the levels were supranormal. They were above 100%, 150 and 200% of normal, which is quite intriguing, because one might think, maybe these patients now are in danger not of bleeding, but of thrombosis, which is another issue. Anyway, so far there has been nothing announced by this company in terms of adverse events, and as I said, a presentation in the World Federation of Haemophilia is very nice, but we look forward to getting more details and hopefully to having this result confirmed. Of course, all these treatments are all very good, but in the end, someone has to pay for it. So if there is a gene therapy, which hypothetically means that you hopefully will get the treatment and you won't need any more treatment in the end. How much does it cost? How much is it going to cost? Who's going to pay for it? The IFA, last year, like many similar authorities around the world, authorized the first real gene therapy which works in Italy, and the cost is 1.5 million euro for this disease. It's not haemophilia, it's much more a serious illness, and there is not enough information to indicate that this gene therapy is actually a lifelong cure. But that is how much it will cost. So in the end, this is going to come, in terms of haemophilia, to people calculating, well, here are all these wonderful concentrations, here's this gene therapy, and what is going to be better in terms of the financial implications. This last slide I like to show because it is something which was happening when I was a young person like you and involved in haemophilia and factor VIII research, and then it became not very important. But I think everybody in this room who has to take injections is fed up of taking injections, would like not to take injections, would like, if at all possible, to take una pillola, the factor VIII. And we need to understand that this is not out of the question. There was research about this in the late 70s and the early 80s, from particularly the various groups involved around the big haemophilia areas in Holland, very preliminary, especially in people, 1 or 2 patients here or there, but indicating that it is not impossible. And to me, this is the challenge to the pharmaceutical industry, especially the recombinant industry, because this kind of data, which was very preliminary, one of the limitations was that this was all on plasma-derived factor VIII, and the problem is if you take factor VIII in any shape or form, in any formulation orally, the vast majority, most of the factor VIII is going to be digested and never reach the bloodstream. Only big cholesterol will reach the bloodstream. But if you are able to make una pillola which is pianissimo of factor VIII, which has a lot of factor VIII, and such a thing can only be envisaged through recombinant technology, maybe it's not so impossible. Maybe this is something which can be aspired to. That we wake up in the morning and with cappuccino we take pretty much like everybody does. They are like me every evening, I do it every evening. You take your antihypertensives and you take your anticholesterolemic and you take this and things like that. Would be very nice. It's not impossible. We aspire to it. Because remember that after every storm, the sun will rise, and for every problem, there is a solution. And the soul's indefeasible duty is to be of good cheer. I decided, late in the piece, as Fulvio knows, to change the title of the talk and to say, let us overcome the barrier of pessimism. People with haemophilia of my generation had good reason to be pessimistic. When we were young, there was no hardly. We are very fortunate to be around. We're around because of Manucci and people like him. You are even more fortunate than we are. Because here you are, all young and healthy, probably thinking about soccer and women and whatever. However, there are things we should still want. It's not impossible to want them as long as you keep pushing. Okay, grazie per l'attenzione.